Hi everyone, this is Hashim over here with Prophix, and today we're here to really talk about the way we can transform the way you budget, plan, and report with the Prophix software and integrating your various Microsoft Dynamics products into our CPM solution. Just a quick overview here about Prophix. We are a corporate performance management solution. It's entirely web-based solution, meaning that you can access Prophix from any web browser of your choosing, whether your laptop, your desktop, your mobile devices or tablets as well. We have over 3,500 customers in a various amount of different countries around the world, and it's really a tool that is dedicated for the finance team, built by finance people. Getting right into it here, let's talk about why we're here today on this webinar. First and foremost, if you feel that your budgeting, planning, and reporting processes could use some improvement, it's on the mind of CFOs around the world. In fact, in a recent survey that was done by Forbes.com, improvements to budgeting and forecasting came second to only monthly reporting at 24% when it came to the importance for finance executives to improve those processes. There really isn't a single CFO that I can think of that would say their budgeting and planning process is perfect. And really that brings us here to this discussion we're having today on how Prophix can step in and help you take your budgeting, your planning, your reporting to that next level. And typically when we talk to our customers prior to them coming on board with a system such as ours, many environments of theirs look like this today. You have your various different ERPs such as your Dynamics systems, 365. You may have your payroll such as ADP or your CRM tools feeding into these massive spreadsheets where you have multiple different people and departments working and collaborating together on these spreadsheets. And because it's a offline workbook, you run the risk of overwrites, deletions, lost versions, and ultimately it's extra time that is being wasted with having to repeat manual efforts, and it only gets worse as your company grows over time. As you add more individuals into this process, as you add more different systems or different databases and grow your company as a whole, over time it becomes more and more difficult to manage this process in an offline environment. However, this is where Prophix comes into the picture, and we help streamline this process. With Prophix, we introduce this concept of having centralized Prophix models, where we help ensure that there's no more broken formulas, enabling a seamless method for your various individuals to collaborate and communicate up and down throughout the organization, ensuring that there is a single source of truth, and from a security standpoint, each user is being presented with only the information that they should be provisioned for. Now, the focus of today's session will be more so around the budgeting and planning and automating and streamlining that process for you with Prophix. But it's important to note that when it comes to the Prophix solution, there is a wide variety of functionality that we offer to our customers. Whether we're talking about budgeting and planning for your forecasting, your expense, personnel, operational planning, any sales and revenue planning, in addition to those capabilities, everything is built around our workflow. So having a centralized, robust workflow to send and assign tasks to different users, setting up a direct data integration to your Microsoft Dynamics products, being able to leverage things such as process automation and centralized formulas. And on the reporting and analytics side, equally as important to setting up your budgeting and forecasting processes in Prophix, we also support you in your reporting and analytics. So think about your performance reporting capabilities, having self-service interactive dashboards, being able to slice your data on the fly, and being able to drill back to your transactional detail with the click of a button. A couple other things to keep in mind as we go through the session today. In addition to the various items that I've already covered, Prophix also supports you in being able to carry out things such as your financial consolidations and close process. So doing things such as a multi-currency eliminations or intercompany eliminations, any joint ventures or mergers and acquisition planning. And last but not least, we are dedicated to taking our product into the future, and that's where we've introduced this concept of a virtual financial analyst. So with Prophix, you have a product where we've introduced the concept around AI functionality, such as being able to do anomaly detection on your entire transactional data to identify any anomalies that may exist. Think about things such as having task assistants. Much like you have Siri or Alexa today, Prophix has introduced this concept of a task assistant to help you carry out various tasks, submit processes, open up various templates and workflows, so on and so forth. All of these are core functionality that Prophix provides to our user base, and it's something to keep in mind as we go through our webinar today. To really set the stage for our walkthrough for the demonstration, these are the core items that we'll be walking through today. We'll start off around your core dashboards, as essentially these are your landing pages for when you log into Prophix. We'll talk about the centralized workflow capabilities. Think about building out your budgeting process from start to finish, assigning tasks to different users, and letting Prophix take care of the rest. You can essentially set it and forget it, and the system will automatically assign tasks to your users, send them automated notifications. We'll then take a look at a couple of different planning examples, such as your expense planning, being able to do headcount planning or payroll planning down to an individual employee level. We'll look at a couple examples around driver-based revenue planning as well. And then we'll take a look at forecasting and automated roll forwards. And last but not least, and certainly relevant to our current situation today, exploring the concept around what-if scenarios and scenario planning. You know, being able to look at and develop a high or low plan, being able to take into account, you know, market performance and things that are happening within your space today, and how you can determine what the implications are going to be on your financials. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right here into the demonstration. At this point, what you should be able to see here on your screen is your Prophix dashboard. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Prophix is available via a web-based interface. What that means to you is, again, any web browser of your choosing you can use to log into Prophix or access the system. We will provide your organization with your own unique URL that you'll use to log into Prophix. And once you're successfully authenticated, you're essentially brought here to your Prophix dashboard. Now, I'm logged in here as my user, and I have configured my dashboard to show a variety of different charts, KPIs, metrics that are relevant for my analytical purposes. For instance, I'm tracking here my revenue variance being presented from an actual and budget standpoint for the various quarters of the current year. I'm tracking details such as my gross margin percent for the current month, my costs. If you have a geographical breakout by locations, we can track that information as well being displayed on the dashboard. Things such as being able to track top 5 profitability or top 5 customers, for instance. All these various metrics and KPIs can be displayed seamlessly on your Prophix dashboard, with the data being directly integrated to your Microsoft products or your Microsoft Dynamics ERPs, enabling for that information to come across seamlessly into Prophix, and thus generating these Prophix dashboards. The great thing with these dashboards as well to keep in mind is security is always at play. What that means is that this one dashboard that we're looking at here can be shared across your entire organization, and based on the security access of each user that's leveraging this dashboard, they will only see the information that you've provisioned for them. So where one person may only have access to United States, for instance, that is the only piece of data that they're going to see being presented on their dashboard. This concept of Prophix security is core to everything that the system has to offer, from dashboarding to reporting to your budgeting and planning. Prophix security ensures that your users are always accessing the right information at the right time without any concerns of any overwrites or being given access to data that users are not provisioned for. Now, when we get into the conversation around having your budgeting and planning and forecasting and streamlining these processes that are very manual and labor intensive in a spreadsheet environment today, this is where we get into the concept and discussion around a workflow. So having a robust workflow where you can assign all your various tasks to your different users and lay them out in a sequential order. This is where you'll notice here in my favorites, I have my Prophix workflow. And within this workflow, I can essentially lay out all the various tasks that we're going to be responsible for completing during our budgeting cycle, our forecasting cycle. Even from a month-end standpoint, you can set up your own designated workflow process. Within this workflow, you have the functionality and the capability to specify what each task is that needs to be completed as part of your budgeting process. So let's say, for instance, we're kicking off our revenue budget. Here I can assign a specific owner that will be responsible for completing that budget. I can assign an approver who will then approve or reject the budget once the initial owner has submitted it for approval. And all of this is done on an automated basis. What that means is that once this workflow process kicks off, Prophix will automatically send an email to the owner of each of your tasks, In that email, they'll receive a link from Prophix that they can click on and take them directly into their budgeting or forecasting templates. Once that user approves or submits that budget for approval, whomever you've designated as the approver will receive an automated email as well from Prophix. So right off the bat, you can see here how leveraging Prophix's workflow capabilities, you can streamline the process for creating a budgeting cycle in place in Prophix and having the system take care of all that automated notification to your various user groups. Typically, when we talk about this process around developing a budgeting cycle, when it comes to an offline environment that many of you may be experiencing today, it becomes hard to create a streamlined process. It's hard to track who are the various individuals that are involved in that budgeting process today, where are we within that budgeting cycle, and you end up with an image that looks very much like this. It's impossible to track how many different versions or iterations of your plan you've already gone through, who was the last person to update the budget, when is the next budget piece of information going to be submitted on your budgeting template. This is where Prophix comes into the picture, and we take this process that should really not be this convoluted and complex, and we streamline it from start to finish. So starting with your baseline budget preparation, kicking off your OpEx planning for your various departments, notifying each department head that's responsible for the data entry with an automated email, kicking off any of your revenue planning, your sales forecast, if you have capital expenditure planning or personnel planning. Essentially, all those various aspects of your budgeting and forecasting can be a task that you assign to different users of the system. Here, we're looking at it from a holistic standpoint. So this is where, as your power user or your Prophix administrator, you have that capability to track where are we currently within the budgeting cycle, what tasks have been completed, what still remains to be complete. On the flip side of this, we have your end users. So once I've kicked off my overall workflow process here, Prophix is going to automatically go ahead and send out those emails to each user. Let's take a look at what the end user then sees when it's time for them to go in and enter in their budget. So coming back over to our dashboard, on the bottom right-hand side here, you'll notice my tasks that I have. Essentially, anything that was assigned to me within that workflow diagram you saw a moment ago will appear here within my list of tasks. Now, as I mentioned, there are a couple ways in which your users can go about accessing their tasks. First and foremost, they can simply log into Prophix here from their browser. On this My Tasks list, they can select the task that they're going to be working on today to go ahead and complete that budget or forecast template. Similarly, they can click on the link that's sent to them via Prophix and that automated email. That link will take them directly into the same budgeting template that they can access from here. The great thing with this task list as well is that we can actually expand this view, and each of your users has the capability to track everything that's currently in progress for their tasks, anything that may be overdue, and what's already been completed. The great thing here is that each user then has their own personal progress tracker. So in my case, you can see I've already kicked off my budgeting cycle, and I can now move on to one of my open tasks that are currently in progress. So to get things started here, we're going to start off with our OpEx planning. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that template. And what's important to keep in mind when it comes to budgeting, reporting, planning, forecasting, any of those core functionality in Prophix, all of those various templates and reports within the system are entirely configurable by you. What this means is the overall look and feel, the colors, the layout, the design, it can be entirely configured to suit your own predefined formatting methods that you may already have, or you can take a completely different approach to your reports as you develop them within the system. In my particular case, what we're looking at here is my operational expense budgeting template. The great thing here is that I have my various expense accounts laid out in my rows. I'm looking at it with my time periods going across the columns. So we're doing a 2021 budget here. Notice that in addition to my monthly breakdown, I also have an annualized column for my 2022 budget, as well as a prior year actuals and a 9+3 forecast. So this is where it's important to note that not only does Prophix support you in budgeting and planning and forecasting, but it's a great tool for setting up that direct integration to your ERP, bringing in your actuals so that then you can do your variance reporting, be able to carry out analytics and comparing your actuals versus budget versus forecast versus prior year actuals as well. Essentially, Prophix becomes that centralized hub for all your core analytical, reporting, budgeting, and forecasting needs. Now, when it comes to any sort of data entry within the system, there's some core differences that are important to note here, where in your current environments today with such as a spreadsheet environment, typically what happens is when you want to do any sort of data entry and then aggregate the data, you're leveraging cell formulas. You're setting up calculations in those templates where you're having to aggregate those cells. And this is where you can typically run into those issues of miscalculations or missed references with particular cells, broken links, or overwritten formulas. But notice in Prophix, when I'm looking at my total here for payroll costs for prior year actual, there's no cell formula anywhere on our template here to indicate that we're summing up those lines. The reason for this is because we're leveraging centralized Prophix models to carry out all of our aggregation and calculations. So we centrally manage your entire business logic, what the roll-up hierarchies are going to be for your accounts, for your departments, for your regions, your divisions, even your product lines or customer groupings if you have those, as well as reporting segments. And the benefit there is we take away that potential for human error in accidentally overwriting or miscalculating the way everything should be aggregating on your templates. It becomes much more streamlined, and you can rest assured that if I'm looking at this value for prior year actual payroll costs of 1.5 million, for instance, I will know that if I look at that value on another report, the value will tie because it's being calculated centrally. So any Prophix report that we pull up, our numbers are always going to be consistent and tie out as they should. Additionally, again, back to your environments today. Think about how you do your budgeting, your planning, your forecasting, even your reporting. When it comes to your departmental planning, as I'm doing here, you probably have workbooks with multiple different tabs that you're having to maintain on a month-to-month basis or every time you're carrying out that budget. Those budgeting templates can become quite cumbersome as you have more and more tabs, and we've worked with customers where you're looking at 50, 60 plus different tabs to capture everything that's part of your budgeting process. And that's where we introduce this concept of being able to filter by the various segments of your business. So for instance, here you'll notice that I can easily filter by my various departments that I have access to. So I'm currently budgeting, as you can see here, for my product marketing department, but I also have security access to budget for content marketing and field marketing. So by simply clicking them from my drop-down options here, I can switch over to that next department and carry out the budgeting and forecasting for my selection here. This is where that security aspect comes into play. Notice that I only have access to my marketing departments, but this same template could be developed where, let's say, the designer of the template or your administrator could have listed out all the various departments here in the dropdown. But my security access only enables me to see the marketing departments. This is where that streamlined efficiencies come into play here with Prophix. What this means is that you can build one consolidated budgeting template with all your various departments or different segments, whichever they may be, and then send this out to your various users via our workflow. And Prophix will automatically parse out your budgeting templates based on the security access for each user. So it reduces the need to double your effort or replicate that manual effort of recreating budgeting templates that are exactly the same every single time just because it's a different department that needs to work on it. It's another step that Prophix will automate for you throughout your budgeting cycle. Additionally, notice that we're currently carrying out our budget here, but I also have the capability to budget for a different scenario as well as track the variances between my budget and scenario A. So it's important to note that you are by no means locked into just having one version for your budget. You can leverage Prophix to generate multiple different versions or iterations of data, especially when it comes to doing things such as scenario planning or having a separate sandbox, if you will, to make adjustments and see what the implications are on your financials. With that being covered, let's actually take a look at a couple of different ways in which you can leverage Prophix to carry out that data entry. So first and foremost, of course, you have your standard capabilities of, entering your numbers into a cell here and having it aggregate your totals. But where you're really getting the benefit with Prophix is being able to do things such as top-down adjustments, top-down spreading and allocations down to each individual month, for instance, where you're entering a number into a total year and having it aggregate or allocate down to each individual month. So for instance, taking a look here at my trade shows account here, we can see that my total is about 6,000 and change. Let's say that we wanted to actually budget $7,500 for the year. Now, rather than going into every single month until it aggregates to my desired value, we can simply type that value into our total. And this is where Prophix's intelligence comes into play, where the system is smart enough to recognize that I've entered in a value of 7,500 into a total line. So what happens is that Prophix will recognize that it's a total field, and it prompts you with the question of how do you want to take that 7,500 and spread that down to each individual month? Do we want to take the 7,500 and spread it evenly? In which case, of course, it'll take the 7,500 divided by 12 months in the year and allocate that. We could choose to spread based on existing data, in which case Prophix will look at the seasonality of the data that already exists and spread according to that seasonality. Or we can actually take this a step further and spread based on data in virtually any segment that you currently report or budget off of. So if you have dedicated spread factors within your account hierarchy, or even if you don't have them today in your account hierarchy, you can set up virtually an unlimited number of spread factors in Prophix to carry out your allocations. So we can actually go ahead and select that member here from our chart of accounts. Notice here that Prophix will group all of your various accounts in this sort of parent-child hierarchy, where here I have my total net income. Underneath it, you can see my operating margin, my taxes. We can expand our operating margin into our gross margin and operating expenses. And essentially, we can keep expanding that down all the way to our lowest level GL account. So Prophix supports setting up that auto aggregation and hierarchy structure within the system so that anytime I pull up my total payroll costs, it's automatically aggregating any of the accounts that are set up underneath. In addition to your P&L accounts, you of course can leverage your balance sheet accounts, your cash flow, any statistical accounts that you may need to leverage as drivers, as well as setting up your own dedicated spread factors, as I mentioned. So for example, you'll notice that I have various accounts such as my FTE, headcount, square footage, units produced, or utilization, just to name a few of the various examples that you can use for carrying out your spreads. So great thing here is I could choose to say that I'm going to do my allocation or spreading based on headcount. With that selection being made, take a look here how you can actually combine that with your other segments. So I could say that I'm going to do my headcount spread, but based on a different department. Maybe we're budgeting for a new department and we want to allocate based on the headcount for an existing department. So maybe we have a new sub-department in our marketing roll-up. We're going to look at our product marketing roll-up, and that's how we're going to allocate based on headcount. Or maybe you're budgeting for a new entity that you've acquired and you want to budget based on a current existing entity that's already part of your core structure. The idea here is that you can easily choose those from your drop-down list for those various segments, and Prophix will go ahead and carry out that spread for you on an automated basis. In this particular case, we're going to go ahead and choose to spread based on our existing seasonality of data. And as we do that here, what Prophix again is doing is taking our total value there, which in this case was the 7,500 that we budgeted, and allocating it down to each individual month. Again, from a seasonality perspective, it's also respecting whichever month had the highest value, whichever one had the lowest value as well. And it doesn't end there. Once you do any form of data entry, whether it's simply entering a number into a cell or actually updating and doing a top-down adjustment as we just did, Prophix will also track the data history. So from an auditability standpoint, you can actually track the history of who entered the data, when was that data entered in, the name of that individual employee, what was the value that was entered in, and Prophix will also track how did that user enter the value into their template. So initially we had simply entered in 750 into our OPEX planning template, but for this new value, we actually entered in 7,500 at the 2021 level, and we spread it based on existing data. So this is an example of taking your budgeting and forecasting to that next level, being able to leverage top-down adjustments, being able to now introduce this concept of data tracking and auditability capabilities so that you're no longer just working in these offline workbooks that you're manually aggregating, manually double-checking. You now have a system in place to carry out those spreads for you, to carry out those auditing functionalities for you so you're always aware of when was your budget last updated. And with that data history functionality, you're tracking the who, the what, and the where of your data entries. There's also the why. Why is it that I'm looking at a value of 916 for this month? Or why is it that March has the highest value for trade shows? What's the reason for that budgeted number? And that's where the commentary capabilities come into play. Prophix supports the ability for any users who are carrying out that data entry to simply add in comments to explain or justify their reasoning for entering in their values. So on any cell, you have the capability to add any additional commentary or justification. And with that commentary, if you have any supporting document or detail, that document can be attached to each individual comment as well. So think about an Excel, PDF, or a Word file, maybe even an invoice that you have that will help support your data entry or your budget. It can be attached to that individual cell. The other aspect here as well is that Prophix will track the name of who entered in that comment, when was that comment entered in, and essentially you now have a timestamp and can easily hover over that cell to see what was the additional commentary that was added in for any number. It is important to note when it comes to commentary and Prophix, these comments are actually tied to that intersection of data. What that means is that this 3085 on which we added a comment, anytime I look at this value on any other budgeting template or any other report in Prophix, the commentary will always follow it. Unlike static workbooks where once you add a comment, it's attached to just that workbook, Prophix commentary follows the data. And what this does is it ensures that anytime an executive member or the budget approver or anyone on the team is accessing a report and they have a question about the variance that they may be seeing, the commentary that was entered in on a prior template will follow that data so that your team always has that latest analysis available for them. In addition to the couple of different things that we've already discussed here with being able to do top-down spreading, the commentary, tracking the auditability of your data as well, there's the flip side of things as well. From a top-down standpoint, we talked about making adjustments at the top, spreading it down to your individual months. We can also take a look at doing a very detailed bottoms-up approach. So take a look at my advertising line here. I've entered in a value of 994 for January for advertising. In some cases, that level of detail is just simply not enough. Sometimes you need to know the breakdown of why did we enter 994, what's that being allocated towards, or what's it being spent on. This is where you can make it mandatory for your users to actually give you that below the line item detail of how they arrived at each of these numbers. So if I try to update this value here, you can actually make it mandatory for them to update it through a line item schedule. So if we go ahead and click OK on that warning, this schedule comes up here where they're being prompted to provide a detailed breakdown of why they budgeted 994 for January and so on. So this total you're looking at is that GL level total you just saw on the previous report, but I now have a free form schedule that I can fill in. So in my case, I'm breaking out advertising into different types of advertising. So my web, television, radio, print, and now your users have the capability to provide you with the detailed breakdown. Any justification and notes and commentary can be added in as well. And this will naturally then aggregate up to that number that you're seeing presented on your budgeting template. So again, if we think about that use case there for you, it's this idea that in certain cases, you need your users to provide you with that detailed breakdown of your budget. You can make it mandatory on specific accounts for which it's mandatory for them to enter that information, or give them the flexible option where if they have additional detail, they can choose to enter it into those schedules. Or if it's not needed, simply enter the value into this level of information that we're looking at here. Additionally, when it comes to the Prophix solution, it's important to note that regardless of the budget you're doing, whether it's your expense planning, your revenue planning, your capital expenditure, or your personnel planning, all that data interacts with one another. All those various models that you're configuring are essentially speaking with one another when you set up your workflow process. What that means is, here you'll notice that I have currently my blank payroll costs for my product marketing budget. This has been done by design because we don't want someone just coming in and entering data in for our department or for our payroll at a departmental level. We have a process in place where our payroll is updated by an individual at the individual employee level by, let's say, our HR team. So if I try to enter data here, I'll get a warning that it's locked down and I don't have that security access. This is where we can come over into our workflow tasks, and you'll notice that I have another task here for personnel planning. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that personnel planning task. And essentially what we're looking at here is a schedule of all of our various employees that are part of that product marketing department that we're doing our budget for. And what we do here is we bring across all your various payroll information on an individual employee basis, such as their employee ID, the employee name, what was the hire date for each employee, what specific department or entity or location are they associated with, are they part of some tiered bonus structure or bonus category that needs to be brought over, are they an hourly or annual employee, what's their specific position within the company, and then of course you have attributes such as their base salary or their hourly rate. The idea here then being we take all those various attributes that you're currently tracking in your payroll system, and we use those attributes to then calculate out your total earnings, your total benefits, your annual increases, any payroll taxes that you may have as well. So this is one way of bringing across your existing employees and updating them for the upcoming budget year. Not only that, but you can also budget for new employees on the fly. So I'll enter in a new employee ID here. And what happens is that Prophix actually prompts me with this employee form that I can fill in for this new employee. So if you already know the name of that new employee that will be joining on, great, you can enter that in. In case you don't, you can just budget by the position as well. So let's say we're budgeting for a new analyst here. I'm going to say that I'm going to choose their position for my dropdown, specify the hire date that we're thinking of bringing on this employee, enter in a base salary amount here, and notice that for retirement matching, I already have a percentage applied. So the idea here is that you can have default assumptions or global assumptions filled in automatically for your budgeting. So if they're going to be an analyst, for instance, I can have a default salary automatically applied that I can then choose to update or make adjustments to. In this case, my retirement matching already has a default value. I can choose a benefits plan of my choosing here as well, and then specifying things such as the country for the purposes of tax implications. So if I choose USA, notice that I'm now automatically prompted with a conditional attribute to choose the state as well. And essentially with this information filled in a matter of seconds, we can come over now to the summary tab, and here you can see, I can see the total breakdown for their earnings, starting with their earnings kicking off based on the hire date that we specified of July 2021. And then notice for the benefits are not applying for another 3 months. So Prophix can set up automated probationary periods where based on the hire date you set, maybe you want Prophix to wait 90 days before applying their benefits. So again, it's part of making that process streamlined for you. You don't have to manually lag anything of that nature. Prophix can put in those steps in place to automatically wait an X period amount of time before applying the benefits for your new employee. Once you've budgeted for that new employee, that essentially enables you to go ahead, update your existing employees, make any adjustments that need to be made. You can allocate the salaries between different departments as well, or kind of budget for employees shifting or changing departments midway through the year. But essentially, once you've updated the existing ones, once you've added any new or budgeted for any new employees or temporary employees within the system, this becomes part of your workflow process. What that means is that whoever is responsible for completing this can click on workflow, hit submit, and this will be then sent off for approval to whomever you've assigned as the approver for this budget. So coming back over to our OpEx budgeting template, this is where we're referring to the streamlined approach. That detailed employee budget that, let's say, is part of your HR team's planning process, once they approve that budget and submit it to your core financial team, that budget will then feed into your core operational expense planning. So you can see here that data then aggregates from a detailed employee by employee level into a more consolidated level here where we can see it broken out by GL account for our product marketing department. And again, from a security standpoint, Prophix ensures the data is locked so that no one else has access to make any adjustments. Once you've gone ahead and updated the rest of your template as needed, the last step here really is to go ahead and click on Workflow Submit. And the great thing is that when you submit your budgeting template, Prophix prompts you with the capability to add any commentary here. So what happens is as I submit this and say this is ready for approval, this task will be sent over to whomever the approver is. They will receive an automated email from Prophix, so you'll notice that the task has moved over into my submitted section and I get a notification that my submission was successful. Whomever I've assigned as the approver will get an automated email from Prophix saying that so-and-so has submitted their budget for your approval. Here is a link directly in the email that you can click on to take you into that budgeting or forecasting template or report, where your approver can then either approve or reject the budget. You can give your approver write access to make any changes if needed as well. And really the benefit there is it takes away that manual effort of reaching out to that individual. So that typical human lag that can occur between, okay, I finished my budget today, but I'll reach out to my manager tomorrow or the day after to let them know, here it is, it's done, you can take a look at it. As soon as it's finished and completed and sent off, Prophix takes on that responsibility for notifying those managers. And then they will receive an automated email directly within their inbox that they can click on to access that template. So for instance, here you'll notice we have an example of that automated email where this is the budget we just completed. Here I'm getting a notification that I can click on the link to go back into that budgeting template. There's a history for that template that was submitted where my user has left a comment here saying it was ready for approval. The idea here is that Prophix will actually keep a running commentary thread between the owner of the task and the approver so that by the time you get to that final approver, you have a running history of all the commentary that went back and forth, explaining the assumptions, the justification of how you arrived at that final budget. What we just walked through there was an example of carrying out your planning from, in this particular case, for your departmental expense planning, where you can, again, leverage the Prophix workflow to centrally assign different tasks to different users. Remember again that you can actually have a centralized budgeting template where you can list out all your departments or all your locations where all your users can essentially share that budgeting template, but Prophix is parsing out the access for each user based on the segments that you've given them access to. So based on the security you're setting up for each user, they're only going to see that information that you had provisioned them for. In addition to that, we took a look at how your personnel plan, which is then done at a detailed level, can then aggregate and feed back into your core budgeting template seamlessly once it's been approved. So again, this reduces the need for manually managing workbooks where you're linking workbooks together. You're waiting on someone to first complete their detailed section so that you can manually copy it over into your consolidated budgeting template. Prophix automates those steps for you via this workflow process. So with that being said, let's take a quick look here at the other side of things when it comes to your revenue planning. So very similarly with revenue planning as well, the idea is that you can configure your templates in any which way you'd like as far as look and feel, colors, overall layout is concerned. In my particular case here, I have a revenue planning template where I'm looking at various products in my rows. I'm looking at it by drivers in this case. So rather than just budgeting straight at the GL account for product revenue, my revenue is actually calculated based on drivers that I've set up. So in this case here, I'm taking a simple approach of quantity times selling price. You may have additional steps as part of calculating out your revenue. Sometimes we've had customers set up processes where you're back calculating your revenue based on margin percentage, for instance, and taking into account cost. Whatever the use case may be for you, the idea is that you can set up your driver-based planning within Prophix. We can set those centralized calculations up where for product revenue, you're putting rule sets in place. Where product revenue for actuals, it's just a straight feed from your ERP system. But for my budget, it's calculated by taking my quantity and multiplying it by my selling price to arrive at that total product revenue. Same concept applies here of carrying out your data entry, entering values into each individual cell here, and then having it aggregate my total product revenue for me. Similar to how we saw with the expense planning, this can be assigned as part of that workflow process as many different users that are needed. In this particular case, the way we have it set up here is that I can filter this report by different customers. So let's say I'm a sales rep who's carrying out my revenue plan. Based on the customers that I have access to, I can simply choose them from a drop-down list. And we can actually take a hierarchy approach here as well. So take an account here where you can see I have my wholesale customers, and I can see not just the total, but all the various customers that are listed underneath that I have access to update that information for. Just like we saw with our operational expense plan, once we're satisfied with our data entry here and we've updated our budget accordingly, we can go ahead and as well submit this for approval, add any commentary as needed, and go ahead and send that off. Again, you may have someone else who's responsible for approving the revenue side of things for the budget. They'll get that automated notification. Again, from my standpoint, I now have another task completed. So we're 3 out of 7 tasks completed here. And we can move on to the next task that we may have on our list. It is important to note as well that Prophix will provide you with a specified deadline that you can set on your tasks. So you can actually set those deadlines in place so that your users are aware this is the date that this needs to be completed by. In addition to that, you can have automated notifications and reminders set up as well, so that when you're within 1 day of the deadline, Prophix will send an automated reminder to the person who owns that task. When you're overdue from that deadline, Prophix can send out 5 emails or notifications. So this really becomes a great way for you to really annoy your users who have to carry out that data entry without actually having to do it yourself. Essentially, it puts a process in place to send out those automatic notifications, ensure your users are aware of their deadlines, they're submitting their budget on time, they're submitting their forecast on time. And in the case that for any reason, let's say they're 5 days overdue, you can actually have Prophix automatically submit budgets or forecasts on their behalf as well. All of which is to say that the workflow provides you with very robust capabilities to manage that entire budgeting cycle, plan for any potential issues or contingencies that may be needed to ensure that your budget and your forecast are completed on time. And not just on time, but our hope and goal here is that we'll take your current process today and we want to streamline that further, shave off time for what you're currently spending today and putting together that budget manually, assigning those tasks to different users, manually sending out those budgeting templates. Now, everything that we've been talking about here has centered around the budgeting and planning process. Let's now take a look at what happens when your plan is completed. We've now moved into the new year. We're 3 months in now, and it's time to carry out our first forecast for the year. So we've got our Q1 actuals, and based on those actuals, it's time to update the rest of the year for a forecast. This is where you can carry out things such as reforecasting in Prophix. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this reforecast template that I have here. And again, you'll notice looks very similar to the budgeting template that we just completed a moment ago for our operational expense planning. But the key difference here now is that we're looking at a template here where we have a 3+9 forecast. As you can see laid out here, what that means is that we have 3 months of actuals and 9 months of forecast. So with 3 months of actuals, of course, you don't want anyone going in and making any adjustments to that data. So this is where you'll notice if I try to adjust it, it's locked down. Again, Prophix security at play, ensuring no one's overriding information that they shouldn't have access to. The benefit here now is that I can go ahead and update my open forecast here. And really where Prophix helps streamline this process is think about your rolling forecast. Once April actuals come in from your ERP system, the April data can overwrite this column with your actuals, or you can keep it separated in different versions. What that means is you may have a dedicated version for 1+11, 2+10, 3+9, like this one, so on and so forth. So if you want to be able to do those comparisons against each rolling monthly forecast, absolutely you can track them separately, or have one dedicated rolling forecast version where every month Prophix is just updating that forecast with actuals, enabling you to forecast the open months. All the various functionality that we've talked about as well is still available to you in terms of carrying out your spreads and adjustments. And typically when it comes to some of your users, they develop sort of a comfort with their current environment. So even though your processes might not be efficient and you may have trouble and it becomes very manual with consolidating your budget, for some users, it's what they're most familiar with. That's something that Prophix has taken into consideration so that when you set up your budgeting templates, first and foremost, you can have them mirror your existing processes as much as you like to ensure that the comfort and look and feel matches what your user base is used to, but also the calculation capabilities. So being able to do formulas on a spreadsheet is still available here. So I could say that for my total trade shows value here, we're going to take our 2021 budget and we're going to apply a 1.15 multiplier. So I can still enter in that formula. I can still do my sum calculations and those various formulas that you may be used to today in a spreadsheet environment. And once I hit enter here, this is where you're combining the best of both worlds. Not only can I leverage those calculations on the fly within my budgeting templates, but Prophix still gives me the capability to carry out my spreads, do those top-down adjustments down to each individual month here. And in this case, I could say I want to take my 8625 and spread that evenly. Now, this is where you really want to notice what happens here is when we enter in that total and we choose to spread evenly from the total year, keep an eye on this value here for our trade shows. So notice that we have 3 months of actuals. When I choose to spread evenly, what Prophix does is it takes that total that we just entered in, it subtracts out the 3 months of actuals because we don't want to overwrite that. It's already come in as our actualized data from our ERP, and it's the remainder that gets spread into our open months. So that's a multi-stepped approach that Prophix is automating for you by you simply entering a value into a total column. For the users that you don't want to have to give them the option to even choose a spread method, by no means do you have to. You can actually do a predefined spread method so that every time they enter a number into a total field here, it will automatically carry out the spread for them. So again, thinking about that use case for you, it's this concept of being able to do your data entry at the total year level, but Prophix is doing the work of spreading that down into each individual month. So again, streamlining your budgeting process for you, still giving you that detailed budget that you want to have at a monthly basis or even at a more detailed weekly basis if needed as well, and then making that all part of a workflow process that you can submit off for approval. The other aspect here as well, as we've mentioned before, is you can have different iterations of your forecast. I'm currently looking at forecast version 1. I could have a version 2, version 3. In the case of version 2, I've left it intentionally blank here. So maybe you want to do a zero-based sort of forecast where I'm building it from the ground up. Whereas in the past ones we've been looking at here, they were pre-populated budgets. So the idea is that you again have that flexibility where maybe one of your workflow tasks or steps could be, as soon as our actuals come in, take our actuals and copy that over into my budget to give me a pre-populated budget as my starting point for my budget. Or for my forecast, pre-populate it with my latest actuals or my latest budget so that we have that starting point. Or start from a blank slate, starting from the ground up, and give your users or your budget managers the flexibility to adjust their data as needed. Once your forecasting is complete, this really brings us to the last item that we have here for today's session, and that's around scenario planning. Now more than ever, especially in today's environment, it's become more and more important for finance teams and our executive teams to be able to carry out what-if scenarios on the fly, be able to determine what are the implications of our labor costs increasing, or what are the implications of us having to decrease our labor by an X percentage? What are the implications of us introducing a new product line because we think it'll be particularly helpful during this time, for instance? Those various scenario questions that come up, again, typically in an environment like today where you're leveraging offline workbooks, it can be a very cumbersome process. It can be a long-winded process. So when your executive team, for instance, needs that answer today or yesterday, essentially, you're simply not able to get that answer to them fast enough. This is where Prophix comes into play, where we streamline that process for you to carry out these what-if scenarios. So here we're actually going to take a look at a revenue scenario analysis. In this particular case, we have a scenario analysis template where I've broken it out in my case by different customer groupings. So my wholesale customers, my retail, my distributors, so on and so forth. Your breakdown here could be anything of your choosing. You could choose to break it out by different types of product, let's say, for instance. You could choose to break it out by different regions, different locations. If we're talking about education, for instance, you could break it out by different programs or schools or colleges. Whatever your industry may be, the idea is that you can leverage those segments to set up your scenario analysis. And there's a couple key things to keep in mind here. First and foremost, we're taking a look at our budget here. And what we want to do is we want to copy that entire budget over into our scenario A and into our scenario B versions of data. So that first step is taking that mass data, copying it over into each of those versions, and then we're going to make adjustments to our drivers here. So let's take a look at how Prophix helps automate that process. On our dashboard here, we have this process to populate our scenarios. Now, this process that we're walking through here, this can be automated. It can be part of your workflow. So if you think about what that means, think about once you complete your budget, Prophix can automatically kick off this task that you're looking at here, or this process, to take your budgeted information and pre-populate a couple different scenario versions for you. So that as soon as the budget's done, I now have 2-3 scenarios that are also populated automatically with the entire budget in a matter of seconds. And now I can make adjustments to those scenarios to easily compare them against my budget. We're talking about days of effort here typically that's now being reduced to a matter of minutes, and being able to copy that mass scale budget into your different scenarios and make adjustments as needed. In this particular case, what we're doing is we're copying our budget into scenario A version and to scenario B. So let's take a look at this first one, for instance. All we're having to do here is we're specifying from a source target standpoint that we're taking our source budget data and we're copying it into our scenario A version. This is much like how you would go about doing the same thing for taking my actuals data, copying it over into my budget version. You have that same capability and functionality where from a drop-down, I can choose any version of my data, whether it's my actuals, my budget, my forecast, anything else that it may be. The other step is you can choose how do I want to make a transformation to that source data once it gets copied over. What that means by that is if I'm copying over $100 from my budget into my scenario A, do I want to increase that $100 by a certain percentage, decrease it by a certain percentage, increase or decrease by an absolute amount? Maybe I want to leverage a multiplier, or maybe nothing. Maybe I just want to do a straight copy that 100 from budget into a scenario. Except the situation that we're describing here, you're not talking about just copying over one value of $100. We're talking about copying over every single combination of your budget. So to really think about what that means is if we look at this common dimensions section here, we're talking about copying over all your customers, your organization, your product, your territories. We can actually check the impact. In this case, we're looking at a combination of over 760,000 that we're taking from your budget and copying over into your overall scenarios. And again, being done in a matter of seconds or minutes, enabling you to then carry out those comparisons between what you had initially budgeted and what you need to take into account for your various scenarios. So with that being said, let's come back over into this template here that we were looking at for our revenue scenario analysis. And let's actually refresh this report that we're looking at. So as we refresh this, notice that we now have our budget copied over into scenario A, scenario B. Of course, they're currently tying out. We didn't make any sort of data transformations, but you can now also leverage these additional drivers. So let's take a look at what are the implications on my product revenue if we saw for scenario A an 8% increase. Maybe in scenario B we saw a 6% increase. What happens if our labor, as a result of that introduced new product line we introduced, we had to increase our labor by 5%. In scenario B, it might be an additional percentage. Of course, with a new product line being introduced, we're going to see an additional increase in our material costs as well. The idea here being that you can continue to make adjustments to those various drivers. You can have more drivers, less drivers, a much more detailed breakdown of the various drivers. So, it's not just simply what are the implications of updating my product revenue. Maybe you have various drivers that affect your product revenue. What happens if my quantity increases by a certain percentage, or my sales price changed from X dollars to another dollars? So now we're talking about price sensitivity analysis as well. The idea here is that once you have these various drivers and assumptions in place, you can then calculate out the implications on your scenarios. So now you can notice that, again, no cell formulas or anything of that nature. It's a centralized model where it's taking into account these different drivers and calculating out the implications on your scenarios. So in the case of scenario A, scrolling all the way to the bottom here, we can then compare the two to see that from a margin standpoint, scenario A is clearly the better one for us to go with as it's generating the higher revenue. And because you have centralized reporting in Prophix, this concept of doing this revenue scenario analysis, we can actually link into our overall integrated financial statements to see what is the implication of this scenario on our overall company performance. What we mean by that is we can now take a look at a report here where I'm looking at what are the implications of the scenario on my P&L statement, what are the implications on my balance sheet, what are the implications on my cash flow. This is part of that process of having a centralized structure in place where you can calculate out those implications from start to finish. That really brings us to the end of our session today as far as walking through the various ways in which you can leverage Prophix for carrying out your budgeting, your planning, having a robust workflow in place. As I mentioned before as well, not only are we automating that budgeting and workflow and setting up that direct integration to your ERP, whether it's Microsoft Dynamics products or any other system that you may be leveraging as well, but the idea is that we also help with centralized reporting, your forecasting, variance analysis, your dashboards and analytics. So not just generating reports, but being able to pivot on that data, slice and dice, access your transactional level of detail are just the tip of the iceberg of what Prophix offers you with this all-in-one corporate performance management tool. So I think with that being said, we're going to end it here and turn it over for any questions that we may have.